Good morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate, and when I woke up this morning, it was black outside. It's starting to clear up, but if the lighting is a little bit iffy, don't blame me. Blame the sky. Speaking of things, though, that are not pleasant, and with that very subtle transition, I would like to talk to you today about the monstrous gaze of disability. Now, a lot of the nuance in this one comes out of the so-called moral model of disability, which you guys already know from my video on the subject that I just adore, just love it. You blame the person for their disability, and in this case specifically for the way they look. This is not always based on purely visible disabilities. This can be based on intellectual disabilities as well, because way back in the old days, with people like Milton and Dante, who wrote the original Christian epics, they believed that people with intellectual disability had no soul. So they would go immediately to hell after they died, all of them, and that is where the association with being cursed sort of came from. If you're born with an intellectual disability, being lesser than the so-called average population, and therefore being something to be despised, which is just beautiful, just so charming, isn't it? When it comes to physical disability, though, I want you to think of a case like the Elephant Man. I want you to think of a case like Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The name Quasimodo even means half-formed. It says so in the Disney movie, which, by the way, that movie is not made for kids. A lot of the things in that movie will go over your head when you're a child, but when you're an adult and you can understand the nuance behind what's going on, it's like, oh my god, this poor young man is so horribly abused by his adopted father and just totally rejected by society when they figure out, hey, it's the bell ringer from Notre Dame, and oh, that's his real face, and he's so hideous, and, they're completely repulsed by him. And that is also the case in the novel, so far as I'm aware. The novel is quite different from the movie, but the novel is also worse than the movie in that regard, and they had to dumb it down for kids, especially, of course. But as I say, that is not a kids' movie. And if you think about very visible disabilities, and let's say if you've ever seen the movie Wonder, well, I would categorize that more under the wondrous gaze that we've discussed in previous videos. I would also say that that can be classified by the monstrous gaze because people look at August and say, oh my, back off, is that contagious? The fear of catching disability is quite prominent in the monstrous view. And while we know that that is not possible, I mean, intellectually we know it. Emotionally, we often don't. And that is part of what creates this sense of the other, but taken to the extreme, to the moral extreme especially. Because, again, as I say, under the monstrous gaze, it is believed that the person is at fault for their own disability, and especially when it comes to a so-called deformation. And that is not a pleasant way to view someone else, but it's also part of our evolutionary instinct. We see something that diverges from us so much that we are immediately afraid of it. I mean, our instinctual radar just goes up. But the only way to get around these gazes that we have been talking about for the past few days, and you'll notice that so many of them have very negative connotations. The only way to truly get around these things is to get to know the person as a person, not as an object of the gaze. There is always subject and object in the gaze. There's the I and there's the you. But when you get to understand more about the you or the other, or about, the subject of the gaze and the object of the gaze, you get to know why these gazes can be inappropriate and most often are. There's much more to a human being than the way they look, and we know this, we are taught this as children. As I was saying yesterday, why don't we carry these lessons that are taught to us as children? Why don't we carry that further with us into adulthood and into the future? It makes no sense to me that a thing can be good for a child to do, but then the moment you become an adult, it's like, oh no, now that you have autonomy, you don't have to listen to these rules anymore. And I think that, I know it's naive to believe that we should stick to the principles we are taught as children, because as we grow up, we're more or less taught not to believe in those things. But I think that in terms of this, we should be self taught, and we should also accept the opportunity of being taught by others who have these disabilities in order to increase our own knowledge about it, and therefore let go of these negative connotations behind the gaze. So that is my discussion of the so-called monstrous gaze. And tomorrow I will be talking to you about, oh, what was it called? Not the sensitive gaze. Oh, there it is, the sentimental gaze, which is somewhat like the wondrous, but more infantile. You'll see what I mean. It's not pleasant. None of these, as I say, are very pleasant. And much as it displeases me to have to talk about these things, they are important to understand so that we can grow out of them. So, on that note, I hope you enjoy and have a beautiful day. Mwah!